I just pressed the button. Um, all right, we should be live now. Let me just check on LinkedIn. Just a second, please. Uh, yeah, we had that last week as well. It was so fun because Bradley and I we decided to go live. But yes, we are live. So hello, everyone. This is Carlos. I'm the founder of Evolve. Today, I am joined by Bradley again. Bradley, welcome. Thanks. And Thomas Panton, who's the founder of Canopey. Last week, he couldn't join our conversation, but he made it today, which is amazing. And we're going to be talking about Canopey. Thomas, I always start my live sessions with the same question, which is the big picture. You are a former swimmer. You had to stop due to an injury, right? I did some digging there and I found that.
Well done. That's impressive.
Then you studied climate change. You built the UK's first company to be paid to collect leftover festival tents to be upcycled, called Festovers. And Festovers, if I understood it correctly, had to pivot and became greener. And then you pivoted again to become Canopy. But perhaps you can, tell us the big picture. Who are you? And tell us where.
Yeah, absolutely.
A bit about
Thanks.
you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Sort of started as a swimmer, and had sort of thought that was going to be my life. Sort of always being ambitious and driven, and when I was in sport, that was no different. And was very focused on sort of going to the Olympics and training with the best of the swimmers and coaches in the country. But yeah, due to injury and then a whole bunch of other things that came after injury, because usually in a highly competitive environment, when you're injured, the sharks start circling a bit closer and creates a bit of a toxic environment. So I decided to leave that behind, which was an incredibly difficult decision because, I hadn't really thought about doing anything else, and had to very quickly think about what that journey was going to be. I spent about a year and a half, like 2 years towards the end of my swimming career, from sort of 17 to 19. Working for Levi's, actually. So I was a tailor, and we would sort of be, sort of altering jeans. I've seen some really old jeans, but it was my first sort of real engagement with sort of retail and consumerism and the way that people were consuming and the way that big organizations that have been around for a long time dealt and changed to deal with fast fashion growing and various other things. But I left that and went to university, as I thought I need to become more learned. I need to expand my knowledge basis of what I want to do now that I'm sort of entering into this new world. That's where I got actually involved. Before I started my first company, I worked for Greenpeace. So this is where I really got my hands sort of deep into the climate movement, and that was ranging everything from being an activist all the way down to being on outreach and speaking at events and onboarding literally tens of thousands of people into the climate movement over 5 years. And that was just, when you're on outreach for an organization like Greenpeace, you need to know pretty much everything about their campaigns, which often means you need to understand the science behind it. So it was my first really sort of becoming a voice for the climate movement. And I'm extremely passionate about the work that Greenpeace does. But I got really, really frustrated with how slow the big governments and the big corporations that they're targeting, how slow they move. And as someone who was, coming from sport, high paced, fast moving, always looking to progress pretty quickly, and then left retail because I was working for a big corporate and I found it really slow again, to then campaigning against big corporates, just stuck with that same issue of just not feeling like we're moving fast enough. And that's when I set up Festovers. So as you said, Festovers was the first company in the UK to be paid by events and festivals to collect leftover consumer product waste. Usually that was tents or chairs for repurpose, recycling or reuse. We launched our sort of first pilot year in 2019. And as you can probably imagine, launching a company in the events industry a year before a global pandemic is not great. So it was, it was great to start my first company, get that sort of startup founder experience. I was a solo founder, even though I had lots of people sort of around me, and that was just, you learn so much doing it. But yeah, nothing I could do. Events industry crashed. I put everything into setting the company up, and even though it would have been great to continue, there was no way that I could keep it going for an indefinite period of time, not knowing when events were coming back. So it was less a pivot and more I went and spoke to my now co-founder, who I've known for a decade, and he's an award-winning marketer and brand designer. He works on big behavioral change campaigns. And I went to him and I said, look, we're dealing with the symptom. Festovers is dealing with the symptom of a much larger problem, which is that we need to buy better to begin with. How are we going to solve that? How can I solve that? And we sat down and we brainstormed and we came up with the concept of greener. And now we've rebranded to Canopey. And the whole movement within that is to build the home for buying better. So it is bringing the umbrella platform that makes the consumer journey easier. Currently you have to go to a blog to find out what sustainable swaps you can make, find a shop which stocks them, double check the certifications in case they're greenwashing. Then you make the purchase. And then once you've made the purchase, you have to open up a separate app to track the impact and carbon emissions of that product. And often it's not very accurate to what you've bought, and you're never rewarded for that journey. Now, that's so many hurdles for a consumer to overcome. And if the climate movement in general is going to adopt a more mainstream outlook, we've got to make it more convenient. So for us, it was, how can we bring that under one platform? Trust and compliance by rigorously vetting products and their brands and the claims they make, looking at third-party certifications, and then a central marketplace where you can find those products, learn about the movement, learn about the products, and engage with shopping in a more sustainable way. But then also we've built an impact calculator which quantifies the impact of those products. So you as a consumer in one journey can learn, trust, shop, and then be rewarded for that entire process. Just removing all of those barriers and making it easier for everyone. And that's where I am today. You're absolutely right, though. On the side of all that, I decided to also go and study a master's and in climate science. So I get to work and consistently humbled by the world's leading climate scientists who just know so much. But it is great to be around them because it really just sort of gives you a big picture and realization of the beast that we're trying to tackle, and how we can do that effectively and efficiently.
Are you like 55 years old, or how old are you? Because you've done so much, man.
Yeah,
just out of curiosity.
I'm 27.
That's amazing.
So yeah, so my swimming career was in my teens, like early teens, and I was, blessed to, I don't know, be given a natural ability for swimming, but also, as I said, I think it's my first real experience of founder life almost, because you're in a high pressure environment, it's competitive, there's stresses, you have to learn whilst also being driven by your own sort of belief. And that's just so similar to a founder. But that was what I grew up with, right? From the age of like 9 to sort of 18. And as much as that was a sort of feels like a very different part of my life, it realistically, it only ended a decade ago. So yeah, and then since then, just been sort of like getting as much experience under my belt as possible.
Incredible. Bradley, would you like to ask any questions?
Yeah, sure. I've got a question. Let's talk plastic, Thomas.
Let's do it.
You recently did an interview. I think it was with BBC Radio Norwich, and you were discussing the government banning of plastic cutlery and plates, and you spoke about Coca-Cola, and how they create a lot of plastic waste each year. The number you called out is quite staggering, like a billion plastic bottles per year. How do we change? You mentioned this earlier, the big guns, the big corporations. How do we encourage the big players to do more?
Oh, absolutely. Huge question. And actually, I misquoted. It's 100 billion every year. Billion. So it's far more.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a ridiculous amount of plastic. And, the real problem with that is that now that there's a consumer pressure for greener alternatives, I use that phrase sort of widely there, but you get big companies like that using a sort of more sustainable initiative in maybe 1% of their products, and then claiming that they are making an effort. But 1% of 100 billion is that maybe that billion, but it's not. It's nowhere near enough, and it's almost all virgin plastic, which obviously derives from oil. How we get the big corporates to change is 3 ways, really. So the first is consumer pressure, and I think that this is something which has been building over the last sort of 2 decades predominantly. It's weird because it sort of calls on the previous generations, in the 60s, 70s, when you're getting the milk floats going around and giving you that is something we're moving back towards almost, because we're looking at those circular models. I mean, it's absolutely right that we should be. But anyway, that consumer pressure that demands that we are having a better impact on planet, people, and how those profits are used as well. So, whether it's tax avoidance or whatever else, looking at Amazon, for example. And I think that there's been some really great research which has shown that is growing. So, the Co-op and ethicalconsumer.org, they do a report showing the ethical consumer market and the trends, and it's grown 1,000% in the last 20 years, whereas traditional household spending has grown 4-fold less than that. So what we're seeing is it's a market that's growing bigger, consumer pressure is growing, and that means that big players are going to listen to that, because otherwise they're going to lose their customers eventually. However, it can't just be that, because ultimately we've built a society of convenience, and I rather I guess controversially believe that that's okay. A lot of people in the climate movement don't, which I totally understand why. But I think that there are ways in which we can move towards a convenient but more circular and greener model. And in fact, actually, I think circularity brings a lot of convenience as well. But anyway, so I think the next thing that comes along with all of that consumer pressure is that you need the government to bring in regulation on what claims can be made, on what sort of materials and what type of impact we can have as companies. We're already starting to see that. It's a bit late, but for example, the Competition and Markets Authority released the Green Claims Code last year. And now that will clamp down on big organizations making claims which they can't back up with evidence. And it's been one of the biggest things in our sector has been, how can we bring that trust to the consumer market so they know that this claim isn't just crap, right? And what's been interesting has been assessing the sort of landscape within our sector, because a lot of brands are making claims, even if they have genuine belief that they're doing something better, they're still making claims that they haven't got evidence for. And that's where we can sort of get rid of that sort of murky water and bring a bit of transparency to the market. But finally, the main thing that needs to happen is that we need companies that are willing to challenge and stand up and put their head above the parapet and, call them out. So, for us, we're not afraid to call Amazon out on the, onerous amounts of plastic waste or packaging or returns being sent into landfill or burned or destroyed. We're willing to be the ones that call that out. And it's not like other people aren't doing that, but I think the advantage that we have is that we've come from a slightly more bullish background, so coming from Greenpeace, but also working with sort of behavioral change marketing campaigns and, those sorts of movements, is that you begin to feel braver in what you say, and you begin to be a bit more willing to take a risk in how you say it. Because often what happens is if you're the company that is going to call someone else out, then you're turning all eyes on you, right? But we're very transparent, and we have to be, because otherwise, we also need to be making sure we're an ethical company as much as we work with ethical companies.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's a threefold movement. You need customers, you need government, and you need startups. And we're beginning to see the precipice of all three of those coming together in a really exciting period of the sector, I think.
Great stuff. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. I while you guys were you were explaining what you just did, I opened a new tab here, because Carlsberg, the brewery here in Denmark, I think they were one of the first breweries to announce that they were going to reduce the amount of package in their in in how they sell the mini crates or the cans. And I'm not, I mean, how do you see that? Because while they're claiming that they're using less plastic, is this just a stunt, a marketing stunt, or do you actually see some benefits from what they claim here? I'm talking about this brand, and I'm sure, like, just like with the ESG movement, a lot of companies, they just take advantage of that, but it's not really, they don't really mean it, or
Absolutely.
like,
And it's really interesting because often they're doing that because they know that people are demanding it, right? So it's a good thing in the sense that, well, it's great that these big companies are realizing that they need to do these things. The difficulty is making sure that they're doing it properly, or actually having an impact, and not just using it for hitting a metric to be able to continue to grow, continue to get customers. And it shouldn't be on the customers to sort of decipher who's telling the truth a lot of the time. Like, this is where it can't just be consumer pressure, right? Because consumers aren't responsible. They shouldn't have to be a climate scientist. They shouldn't have to be an expert in ESG and social impact. But they should be able to buy products which are having a quantifiably better impact than the mainstream counterpart. In your example, I don't know enough about their actual workings as Carlsberg. It's not a company that I've sort of delved into. But if we take a generalist sort of view on big companies making these changes, you get a pretty big split and not much really in the middle at the moment. So you'll get companies which are genuinely trying to sort of reassess how they work, and that is either led by them or it's led by their countries, like regulation. So in the UK, we've got new regulation on what claims can be made, which is going to just pressure companies to make those changes an actuality. In the EU, we're starting to see those regulations come through, and I'm sure that Denmark has a similar regulation coming through or in place. The difficulty is that you have the others that know it's a great marketing ploy and budget for the fines that they'll get for lying. So this is something that isn't widely spoken about, but big companies will. They have huge marketing budgets, as we all know. But what they do, what the new line in that budget is sort of the risk, the legal fines, the crackdown by regulation, because then they can assess, well, how many sales are we going to make by making this claim? And does it justify the fine of £1 million or £2 million? And often it does. Like, Amazon just budget for it. It's just part of their marketing campaigns. And that's problematic. Like, this is where the regulation is still very much in its infancy, because big corporations a lot of the time can just be like, okay, that sucks, but also, like, it's not gonna kill us right now. So what we need is that regulation to become stricter and more I guess more harsh, and it should be done on a revenue basis. It should be done on the size of company. You can't just have a blanket statement which says all companies will be fined $50 million, and then some small company that didn't know they were making a mistake suddenly is buggered. So we need to make sure that it is dynamic to size and sector and all these different things, and that is really complicated, but it needs to be done. So yes, I think that unfortunately we do still see, and we are more than ever seeing companies making claims which aren't true. It's just working out sort of which side of the fence they're sitting on. Are they doing it because they're genuinely trying to make a difference, or are they doing it because they know it's a good marketing tactic? The two aren't mutually exclusive, right? Like, if the sector is going towards ethical consumerism, then naturally, as a for-profit company, you are going to be as smart and future-proofing yourself to build those things in early. As a startup, why wouldn't we do that, right? Apart from all the science, apart from all the fact that we need to as a society, there's just a whole piece here. Like, if you're going to build a for-profit company in the next decade, you might as well build these things in now, because otherwise you're just going to get left behind in 5 years. So it just makes commercial sense as well. But the real sticking point is that it needs to have genuine impact, and I think we're yet to sort of see that become an actuality yet.
Really interesting. And when you look at the corporates, which corporations do you see that are actually starting to change? Because I think that's interesting. Like, when you like I have two daughters, and they have a very different mindset. You can already see that mindset is instilled in them, as opposed to myself when I was growing up. And I think it's so different and very interesting how they think, and what the sort of pressure that they do in me or her, their mother, like, is this organic, is where is this coming from? It's so interesting. So
Yeah.
when you look at the corporations, maybe in the UK where you're based, or some global companies, which companies do you, if you can, if any, like, if you could, that you could mention, that are starting to make a difference and look at it more seriously?
I mean, a really good example of this is IKEA, right? Like, they have radically looked at the fact that they're essentially a fast fashion company for furniture, right? Like, that's what they were built for. And yet they have a really deep rooted understanding of the impact that their products have, particularly as they may break. And, they're looking at how they can make them more durable. But also the main thing is that they've accepted a return scheme. So you can take your old furniture back and they will repurpose it or reuse it, or make sure it's disposed of in a better way than just simply going to a bulky landfill site. I think that it's very early stage. I think that a lot more work needs to go into it. However, when you see a company of IKEA's size, radically changing their model, that's completely new. And that's only come in the last sort of 3 or 4 years. So, I think that is something which I'm excited to see roll out more, and more. Like I say, I think circular models will ultimately prevail. The difficulty with all of this is, does the consumer buy into it? Because as much as it's great to build a circular company, if consumers aren't going to do it, then you're sort of barking up the wrong tree. So I'm a big believer that we're sort of at point A and we need to get to point Z, but there's all these different points in between that we need to hit for the consumer first. And sometimes you can jump over, and you can sort of skip to the next bit, but ultimately you've got to make it super easy to make that transition. So for us, a lot of people ask us, why don't you just sell secondhand products? And it's like, well, I'd love to do that, but good luck getting sort of a secondhand deodorant or a secondhand cleaning product, or any number of pretty much any sector. Like, even with clothing, there's only a finite amount of secondhand clothing, and eventually that clothing is going to break down. So what do you do? There needs to be a place where you can buy new clothing when you absolutely fundamentally need to, but that it's made from better materials or from a better company with a better sort of management system. You could send your clothing back at the end of life, those sorts of things. So for us, it's about how can we implement a model which allows that transition to be adopted quicker. And then once they're in that sort of model, we can then implement new product features, which don't, just make our consumers' lives easier, but ultimately also are better for the planet. So, right now we don't have distribution centers, but once we do, then we can get all those products sent back at their end of life, and we can work with different companies and startups again to make sure that they're being sort of repurposed, going back to my first company almost, making sure that we're not just getting to the end of life and going, well, that's the end of that product, on to the next one. So I think, that my first sort of reaction to your question was IKEA, but just generally across the industry, I think you are starting to see more companies make it to sort of global neutrality and bringing in sort of social and environmental responsibility into that. So I spoke about this the other day. A good example would be Ben and Jerry's, for example. They're a dairy company. They've got lots of issues with the fact that dairy and the animal agriculture industry is incredibly polluting and all of these things. But from a social perspective, they're a company which said, we will not sell in Israel, right? Because that's where they stood. That was their stance. We believe that because of what's happening in Palestine, we don't want our products there until we see some sort of global sort of solution to the area. They sold to Unilever, and Unilever said, we want to put your products in Israel. And Ben and Jerry's took their parent company to court because they said, no, that's not our company policy. And we told you that before you bought us. And that was the deal. You agree with where we stand as a company and help us strive to be better, not buy us and then just change our entire ethics. Now, that is really important as we sort of grow the next era of capitalism, because if we're going to continue down the route of companies being for profits, they're going to be acquired by a bigger company and they're going to grow and become scalable, organizations. Then we have to stay true to our values right all the way through that. And another good example of this is WhatsApp. WhatsApp wanted to keep encrypted messages and make sure that that data was completely private for the users, and it was just user to user, and no one could sort of tap into that. When Facebook at the time wanted to buy them, they said no originally, and then later down the line, when Facebook came back and offered them a larger sum of money and understood the value of what they were doing, WhatsApp said, yeah, sure, but this is the real sticking point of this acquisition, is you can't then go behind the scenes and get rid of that encryption. Now, I'm probably going to eat my hat when I find out that Meta's been stealing all of our data again. But the point is that these smaller companies, and this, I was talking a lot about social impact there, but the same could be said for environmental impact. People ask us often, we want to exit at some point, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that we get acquired. It could be an IPO in sort of 10 years, 15 years time. But if it is going to be an acquisition, would you be bought by Amazon? And the question is always a bit of a difficult one to answer, because at the moment we are a challenger to them, right? We're saying what you're doing is terrible for the planet and for people. However, can you imagine if we stood our ground and said, yeah, sure, you can buy us, but you have to stick with all of the principles that we've laid into our foundations of our company. And actually what happens is that then we can scale our model globally much quicker than we would have been able to before, and then look at the impact that we could have on the retail industry. So, all of these things, I think, are ultimately what it comes down to. As big companies begin to realize that they need to change, they begin to acquire startups which are working in that sector, is that if we stay true to that value and we keep the pressure on to make sure that those big companies understand they need to change as well, then really what we can do is move away from this sort of greenwashing and move towards an actually, pretty radically different economy. But for the consumer, they wouldn't even know. And that's the real sticking point that needs to be noted.
Brilliant. Bradley, would you like to go ahead?
Another question for you, Thomas. I recently did a contract piece of work with the V&A Museum. It was really pleasing to see that with regards to their packaging, so the outer packaging of goods that would kind of come into the warehouse, that they would repurpose those boxes and ship customer orders using that outer packaging and place like a sticker on top of the box saying, we're trying to do our bit in terms of the environment, reuse, repurpose. Do you think other brands should be doing more with packaging?
100%. Packaging is one of these big things which everyone can relate to, right? We've all got that Amazon parcel when you've ordered something this size and the package is huge. It's just the most ridiculous thing ever. And I think that even Amazon are tackling those things now. They've realized that they can't just be shipping just any old box with whatever the size of the package. They need to be more responsible in that. And I think that, again, ultimately, what companies can be doing is looking at reusing throughout the supply chain. So yeah, exactly. So they might get the bulk stock from packaging and they might repurpose that packaging to then be used for individual stock, which goes to customers. I think that's a great way of doing that. The next phase of that is what happens once the customer has it. Because ultimately, one thing so this is from personal experience with Festovers, we had a model where originally the idea was that we would collect the materials and the products and the tents, etc., repurpose them, or if they were good enough quality, we'd rent them out at the next festival season. Obviously, when the pandemic came, we couldn't rent them out. So what we did was we set up sort of virtual festivals and sent out tents to families in their gardens.
Brilliant.
This is all, it sounds great, right? And I love the community aspect of it. But what happens when that tent is broken or damaged? We didn't have a circular model to bring it back at that point. So ultimately, those families, it's great that we can facilitate them being able to live the festival life whilst in lockdown. And I love that we were able to have that social impact. However, from an environmental perspective, we just delayed the issue, right? We collected hundreds or thousands of tents and ultimately shipped them all out, which is great. Great to help people and engage the community, but we just delayed the life cycle by another year or however many, right? So as much as I think those are really important steps, the next era of that needs to be, okay, but once it's with the consumer, where does it go then? Are there ways in which that can come back to the brand? Are there new organizations which will be better at repurposing or creating compostable, home compostable or industrially compostable materials and those sorts of things? So, we're getting some great research done by TIPA, so TIPA, and also Solinatra, who are based here in Norfolk, and they're looking at how they can create, home compostable or industrially compostable, depending on the type, materials for packaging across industries, though, because the difficulty has always been fresh food. How do you get away from plastic in fresh food? At the moment, you can't. There's literally nothing that you can use, which doesn't end up either in the landfill or an incinerator. So the way that you need to move that is through innovation, and again, startups, right? So or researchers. So what I think is great that companies are adopting these linear models of like making things better and delaying the impact. Absolutely, as I was saying, it's all a stepping stone, right? That's absolutely the first stepping stone, and all companies can be and should be adopting that today. But what then needs to happen pretty quickly is, what next? How do we get it back? How do we make sure it doesn't end up in a bin? And how can we make sure that the consumer journey isn't the end of that journey? But I think it takes time, and I think that it's going to be a bit of testing, and hopefully we haven't left that too late. But I'm pretty hopeful that we're moving in a really good way in the consumer industry. I get a little bit frustrated by people who say that, oh, it's not perfect. I'm like, oh yeah, it's not perfect, but like, at least we're trying, right? Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like,
direction, isn't it?
There's no point throwing your hands up and giving up. So we might as well build those stepping stones and move towards that perfect utopian idea as quickly as we can. But to think that we can just go from one night to the next and everything's suddenly, it's just unrealistic. So I think the big companies can do more, but I think that the options are beginning to be there, which is great.
Got it. How important would you say is incentivization for customers? We said there needs to be, more noise coming from the consumer, a want, a need to do better. Because I know I was at John Lewis before the V&A, and they had a scheme within, I think it was beauty, whereby, return 5 empty bottles or containers to us and we'll give you £5 off a new fragrance, or I don't know, a piece of makeup.
It's absolutely, like, you need more of those schemes which aren't just about money. They're about the impact of that product or whatever service or whatever it is, whatever industry it is. And I think that the way that you do that is a bit of education. Like, I think just generally across, government, third sector, private sector, whatever it is, like, it all needs to just come down to educating people quite early on. What's really great to see is that you do see a pretty big growth in sort of awareness the younger people are. The difficulty is that the action gap is often bigger. So what you do tend to see is that older generations, or like parents' age, when they know about the issue, they're more likely to take action on the issue. And it's usually to do with price, right? Like, if they've got a bit more disposable income, they can actually afford the products. They are they're the bread maker in the family, whatever it might be. Whereas the kids, they don't have their own job yet, but they're really passionate about it. So as much as they love that movement and want to be behind it and will go on the streets and shout about it, there's not that much incentive for them to take action on it. So I think what will be really interesting over the next sort of few years is how we close the intent to action gap through incentives, through whether it's rewards. I don't necessarily think that discounts is the way to do it, because unless it's like a discount of sort of amount. So in terms of, you bought 5 and you get X amount off, or whatever it is. Like, coffee shops start doing that, right? Bring your own reusable cup, you get X amount off. And actually that works out as a pretty good deal, because once you've bought certain many, you're getting a free coffee. Those sorts of things are really good. But generally, I think that actually real value in all of this is getting people to understand the value of the product. If you're buying a better impact product, you're buying better materials, you're buying better quality, it's more durable, it's been made with love and with people who are paid actual salaries, rather than sort of in sweatshops around the world, and or in Leeds, as we found out not too long ago, or Leicester, or wherever it was. I think that actually, once people start understanding that what they're buying will last them longer, they'll understand that also that has an impact on price. If I buy this reusable water bottle, which I've had for I don't know, a decade probably. You know, I have not bought a single plastic bottle. Like, that has saved me money because I've just got unlimited resource now. But you know, we're talking privileged here, right? Like in the West, we've got clean water everywhere. But it's a good example of how we can begin to shift those mindsets. I just think that for us, the way we do that is all about that buy better messaging. You know, you're making your life better by buying better products, and ultimately that does mean that you save money over time. You know, the difficulty is we're in a really difficult economic time for a lot of families, so asking them to put the money up front to get it, that's where the difficulty might come. So yeah, it's just going to be that balance. But I think absolutely right, we need to incentivize. It's just about how that incentive's done. You don't want people to think that, you know, the 99p piece of clothing from Pretty Little Thing is the normality. You want them to go, okay, well, actually, if I spent £10 or whatever on the same piece of clothing, it's going to last me longer. I'm contributing to a better economy, and ultimately, then I'm going to be happier with that product. And if we just change that mindset, then we'll get there.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's not an easy task.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. You said a word that I like very much, which is community. And I think your brand or company, forgive me, is being built with a community of investors, right? So I would love if you can talk a bit about your business model, as in like how do you bring investors in, but also how you're bringing sellers in, you know, for your marketplace.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and it's something that we did at the end of our first tranche of pre-seed at the end of last year. So we raised just under 270k, mainly from sort of 2 funds and a handful of angel investors. But we wanted to do a crowdfunder, and it wasn't because of the money that we could get from a crowdfunder. It was because people who really believed in the mission could become part of the company before the company is even launched. And that is building the sense of community because they own a piece of that organization that they're then supporting, and they'll shout about it. And yes, that's a whole marketing piece, but also just from a social impact piece, you're giving people ownership of the of what they're buying as much as them actually buying the product themselves. You know, they're owning a piece of that as we grow. And I think this is something that, you know, we've seen companies like Brewdog, although, you know, that's
that's exactly who I was thinking here.
So Brewdog did this really well. They wanted to do equity for punks. There was no legal structure really to do that. There wasn't crowdfunding platforms, so they ended up with like literally thousands of people on their cap table, which is like crazy, but also it's how they brought people into what they were building. The difficulty is that when companies who don't live by the culture that they talk about, is that can then end up being a pretty toxic community, as we've sort of seen in organizations like Brewdog. But I think it's still, the point stands that, you know, the theory of what they were doing is still valid, and it does work. You know, they've grown to become one of the largest breweries because people are just like, it's like a cult, right? People feel like they own that it's them, it's, you know, whatever Brewdog has just succeeded at, they've succeeded at. So that's been a whole piece for us, is like we wanted to do that from day one. And that's sort of how we've continued to sort of operate in very early stages of raising money. Is just like anyone who we bring on, we want to feel like they are valued. And, you know, that takes a bit more work than just considering them a silent investor, but it also means that we reap the rewards of that because people talk about us more. On the other side of that, you've got brands. Like the vendor community at Canopey is not just important from a commercial aspect, right? Like we have to have brands, otherwise we don't create network effects and we don't create sort of customers coming in and more brands, et cetera, et cetera. But what's really unique for us is that not any brand can sell on the marketplace. You've got to go through a rigorous vetting process. So I think what has happened is that we've been able to establish a happy authority of brands understanding that we've worked in the sector for a long time, and that we bring an expertise in that first stage of making sure that, well, if you are an ethical brand which can live by its claims, then we are your home and we are your community. Like, this is where you belong. And it's really important, because then the brands which are really proud of those claims will apply because they know that they want to show that off. So we've actually seen these brands, we've had over 170 companies sign up to sell and go through that vetting before we've even launched, before we've had any customers come through the door, just because there's a whole piece here, which is that the market is murky, it's non-transparent. Regulation means that almost all other marketplaces now non-compliant because of their vetting processes. So these brands want the security as much as they want the community as well. They want somewhere which they knows the legal side of this and is willing to put the work in to make sure that both customers and vendors don't get burnt by new regulation which they didn't know about. So I think the other side of this is that we don't really consider anyone a buyer or seller as much as, they are commercially, but they are all part of Canopey, right? Like we wouldn't exist without them. So they're as valuable as us two founders. Like, we can have a great idea and we can, have all the evidence to back up that this is a thing and customers can tell us how much it's needed. But unless you actually value the people that you're bringing around you, then we're not building a company because we need those people. So for us, it's been a huge part of just the whole ethos and mantra of Canopey. The way we say it is everyone is welcome under the canopy because it's fundamental. Brand, consumer, individual, investor, big organizations that want to partner with us, they're all welcome, but they have to pass that, they have to be sort of fulfilling the claims they're making. And there's another group there that I mentioned, which we don't really talk about that much out loud because it's more of an internal process. But one of the things that we knew we wanted to do for vendors was not create the Amazon model where you've got forums full of vendors who feel undervalued and not listened to. Amazon set up these forums where vendors can raise complaints or raise things they want changed, and it is just ignored by Amazon. It's a free-for-all, and it's just vendors complaining and feeling like shit. We didn't want to fall into that category as we grew and as we scaled. So for us, the way we do that is create a two-way system of conversation, firstly, so that we can speak to them, but also they can always speak to us at any time, whenever they need something. But also that they get something for it. We're not just a place to sell. We're not just another on-the-channel platform. We have the vetting process, which gives them a compliance thing. We have the calculator, which gives them data and allows them to track that and market it. But also we have partnerships, deals off in other places, which are valuable and make them better impact companies, whether that's legal or whether that's sort of, tree planting, whatever it might be. And these are the things which I think most companies just forget about when they have like relationships with businesses or customers, is like, you can do more than just the traditional business model. You don't have to just have it like sell and buy and transact. Like you can have it like you're a part of the community. Here's all this great stuff that we can help you with from our experience in the sector, from our partners, all of these things. There's all of these different communities within the Canopey community, and they all are as valuable as the other one.
I love it. That's Evolve. That's all about that, actually. What you just said, that relationship. I believe relationships are everything in life. So Brad and I, we spoke about this a few times. So what I wanted to ask you then is like, so you have more than 170 brands today in your marketplace?
Wow, so we've got 170 that signed up, right? But this is the really important thing for us, is that we're not just accepting anyone. The vetting process is pivotal to our model. And yes, that might not mean that we have the 300 brands that some of our competitors have without naming them. But it does mean that if there's a claim on any of those products and brands, you don't need to worry. We've checked it. We've done the work for you, which other places just haven't done. So yes, we've had 170 sign up. We've had about 120 start the vetting process, and then a fair number of those have passed that vetting, but we'll continue to work through the rest. Yeah,
cool. And out of these brands, what are they actually selling? It's can you and how does what do these companies they look like in terms of products that they're selling? What is it that they're selling?
I mean, the direct answer is like it could literally be anything, right? As long as they can pass the vetting process. In terms of sort of what we have going through at the moment, it ranges from sort of beauty, self-care to cosmetics, food and drink, clothing, on-the-go products, homeware, literally pretty much anything you'd find in your house at this point in time, I think. And the only things that we have less of course, are like electronics, appliances, the bulkier products like TVs and etc. Those sorts of things, because it's really hard to find brands which can quantify any sort of green claims on them, and actually you'd be better off buying secondhand in a lot of these cases. So there are some great secondhand marketplaces like Back Market, for example, where you can get these sorts of products much cheaper, but also much without buying sort of a new product. However, I think that because of the way the industry is changing, we will be in a position where we will start seeing brands of those nature. So whether it's modular phones like Fairphone, I know that Nokia have just released one as well. We'd love to start seeing those sorts of brands and products come through, because that will allow us to expand that product offering a bit wider. So we literally become the place, like when you need something new, make sure it has a better impact on the planet, and that we're the place you go for that. But yeah, at the moment it's quite varied, but across the sort of traditional, I guess almost like supermarket,
right,
product categories, but without the heavy reliance on the food sector, because that's not our play.
Mm-hmm. And how do you define what's the vetting process like, and how do you define the ethical, what a ethical brand is, so they can be part of Canopey?
Yeah, great question, and super important, right? Because this is what it's all about. And I think that we split it into three areas: so brand or business, product, and then materials. And the way we do this is that we have the 3-step process of, they will go through a number of different sort of questions and claims that they could make about their brand. There have to be a fundamental threshold with all these things. So they have to have policies which will sort of give them a net zero plan, or, move towards sort of work, they'll have workers' rights policies and all of these things, which should just be standard, but always worth checking, because some brands don't have them, and you need to get them done. But then you go through those questions of, like, are you a living wage employer? Do you have waste management schemes? Are you carbon neutral, net zero, carbon positive? Various. There's a whole bunch of them. Are you B Corp? Have you got an ESG mark? All of these different things. Then it will go on to products. So products, in a similar vein, it's pretty simple with that. So it'll just be like any of the accreditations. So vegan, certified organic, home compostable, industrially compostable. We never use the term biodegradable because it's too greenwashy. So it's either home or industrially compostable, and they're different things, and we explain that. And then, a whole bunch of others. And then the materials of the product. So they'll send us the weights of the product, and then the breakdown of the materials that are used in that product. For example, you'll have a t-shirt, and it might be, I don't know, some random numbers, 15 grams of organic cotton and 5 grams of recycled nylon. I don't know, really random. But then we can run that through our impact calculator that we've built and see the literal impact, carbon emissions, water waste, plastic waste of those products. Then the next stage of that is that for any of the claims they've made, we request evidence. So third-party certifications. If you're a living wage employer, we want to see you accredited. If you're claiming your product is vegan, well, where's the V label, the Vegan Association, process you've gone through? We get often the question of, well, my product's vegan, so surely it's cruelty-free. Well, actually, no. Cruelty-free encompasses an entire supply chain, and the way that those source materials are sourced, or whatever it is. It's not just about the fact that the material itself isn't an animal product. So, all of these things, and that's why we ask for sort of third-party certifications or audits that have been done on those claims, because then we have the evidence to back them up. Should the Green Claims Code come clamping down on us, so the CMA come knocking on our door, we can turn around and say, whoa, every claim on the product, here is the evidence for it. We haven't put any accreditation on that product which hasn't been backed up by evidence through our vetting process. And for the consumer, they know that if they search plastic-free on our platform, they will get products which are 100% plastic-free and are not just, we've actually, the cap's plastic though, or it comes with this, it's 100% plastic-free. So those are the sorts of things we do. And then throughout the entire platform, that same impact data is then relayed as a savings calculator. So we've aggregated 2 databases. Well, one of those databases is a sort of amalgamation of just like loads of materials life cycle assessments. And then the other database is our own mainstream product database. So looking at sort of the best-selling t-shirt on Amazon, or the best-selling toothbrush by Colgate, those sorts of things. So that we can then compare that product's impact with the brand that's just gone through our vetting process, and we can say you're saving X amount of water or whatever it might be. So it's pretty rigorous. We always say to brands, we appreciate you probably just want to get onto another selling channel quickly. We'd rather you took time on this, keep coming back and forth, and just, you know, don't feel like you have to take out a week of your working week as a startup or as a company with limited resources to do this. We want you to do it when you've got the time, and we want you to make sure you're working with us, because then we will make sure that everything you've said has been backed up. And then when you're on the platform, you can live happily knowing that it's sort of happy sailing from there. Yeah, so that's sort of the sort of deep dive into the vetting process at the moment.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that's my last question, and then Bradley, if you have another one, because we are approaching the end. But I think in this line of business, what I find one of the probably the challenges, but also maybe an opportunity, is the educational element, because it all seems that you need to, let's say I'm a brand and I would like to be part of your marketplace. I need the education, and I need to have access also to a certain ecosystem, so you know, of actors there, so I can understand what to do and how I can comply with what with your vetting process, so I can be part of that, right? So do you guys do anything in that regard, and especially because you use a lot social media, you have a big voice there, so maybe you can comment on it. I'm very curious about it.
I think you will have seen we're very transparent about sort of how strict it is. Like we, you know, regularly make sort of statements about this on all our socials, and including our personal socials as well. And, you know, on LinkedIn, that's sort of what I'm known for, is sort of just laying down the law on like what the regulation is. And, you know, it pisses some people off, but at the end of the day, I'm just trying to help all brands, small, big, whatever, make sure that they fall in line too, so that, you know, no one is left behind, and we can continue sort of doing the work that we want to do. In terms of sort of whether the company provides sort of advice for companies to go through that, like absolutely, right? Like you can go through the vetting process whenever you want, really, and that will give you insight into what we look for, but also give you the examples of the evidence that you could get for each one. So then you know where to go, how to apply. And as we grow, we'll be sort of building up that bank of resource as well for sort of like public use as well. But, you know, even on our front end for the consumers, like we are very transparent about what we are asking for and what is backing up those claims. There's a good organization actually that does sort of certifications very similar to our vetting process, called ETHY, ETHY. And they're great. You know, there's definitely no bad blood there, but the issue is obviously once you've been vetted, it's like, okay, you can put the label on your company, but again, for the consumer, it's still a directory. You still have to go to each individual platform, etc. So we're just trying to remove those barriers a bit. But again, they're also quite transparent about what evidence you can provide, and I think that is the way you have to do it. Is that you know, if you're going to be vetting companies, you need to be quite clear right from the offset what they're going to need to pass that. And when a company gets in touch with us, or when we get in touch with a company, we make that, you know, pretty easy to understand. And then it's just about the time it takes for them to go through it. But, you know, one thing that we would like to do as we grow is become sort of that platform, not just for the process and for the end game of sort of having people converting and shopping more sustainably, but also a place which helps brands. You know, we innovate with brands. We can point them and connect them in the right, you know, directions and resources. We can, you know, very far in the future, we can help fund those changes. You know, all of these sorts of things, like, are big, ambitious goals for what we want to do. But they're, you know, they're on a roadmap, and we'll get there when the time is right. Need to launch first.
Of course.
You know, the whole mission of us is to remove the barriers for living sustainably, so making sustainable living, and to do that you need to make it accessible for everyone at every touch point of that journey, whether it's in the educational pieces we do in our blogs, or whether it's the vetting process itself.
Brilliant.
When are you
Yeah.
looking to launch? Is it imminent or is it?
It's imminent, but it's tech permitting, right? Like, so we have
Yeah.
3 complicated processes going on. You've got an entire marketplace system, which is complicated in its own world. But then we've got the vetting process and all of the evidencing and processes there, and then also the impact calculator, which plugs into many of those different places, right? Many different hooks. So the reason that we haven't launched yet is just simply because we've just, you get it finished, or you think it's finished, and then you find something which doesn't work. And it's like, you know what, you've got to go fix that before you go live, very transparently. But we're at a point now where it really is just making sure that we're onboarding brands and that they're happy with that process. And we've tested that internally, and we've tested it with people separate from the company as well. So the idea is that our beta launch, which will be a closed launch for investors, new people in our newsletter, we'll do a call out to our community before that. They will be able to access that platform, hopefully the last week of March, possibly the first week of April. Again, it's all down to tech, really, but we're not too strict on that date because it is just the beta launch. It is just the soft launch, and that will run for about 2 months, maybe a bit sooner. But the idea is that so long as we're happy with just like how an order's going through, if there are any returns, basically the whole process rather than testing each individual part of it, and listening to those individuals using it, right? Like that's going to be most important for us is calling them up, sitting them on a video call, and screen sharing, and them telling us what they hate and what they love, and getting that, and then making tweaks and changes, and then public launch will be in the summer, or early summer, so June, before people go away for holidays, so that we can capitalize on them in the summer period, basically. But I think what's really important for us is that we are doing things, there's a lot of pressure for startups to just launch and fail and then fix. And as much as I think that's really important, I think when you're doing something which is falling into the compliance arena of like ethical claims, you need to make sure that the platform works in the way that you are claiming it works as well. So as much as we could just launch it right now, it doesn't, it's not what the mission is, right? It's not what the platform is for. It needs to be able to go from vetting to data, that entire process without glitch. And luckily we're at a point where the tech works. So now it's just a matter of, we're moving towards the dauntingly close. I was just looking at the date on my computer and I was like, oh damn, that's in like 3 weeks. So yeah, the idea is that in the next month you'll see, or there would be a beta launch, but we're very transparent. We're building publicly. I think this is one thing that startups should do more, is just like be very candid about what you're building and why something is delayed, or why you said this date and then it's not that date, and all of these different things. And because that's the reality of building a company. It's Absolutely. Not all, when Apple did their first demo of the iPhone or whatever it was, and there was a very specific process that he could click through, otherwise it wouldn't work, and it broke when he was trialing it. That's exactly what it's like. We've like put all these great things and features which do work, but we just want to make sure that you guys don't go on it, and we lose you on the first journey because you get frustrated or whatever else.
Yeah, you want the journey to be joined up, don't you? So you going through that beta stage and capturing the feedback, particularly around like usability, search, just means you have a great opportunity to get people to go through to check out, for it to be seamless.
Exactly that, and ultimately, all part of that goal of just removing those barriers for consumers, vendors, and partners, because that way we can actually have a truly radical impact on the consumer industry and build the future of retail. So, if we can do it correctly, then that impact becomes much more of an actuality quicker. So yeah, very excited for it.
Very excited. I'm very excited too, because I signed up to your newsletter.
Nice, cool. How'd you find it?
In the future.
Yeah. Thanks.
Very nice. All right. So Thomas Bradley, thank you so much for this. It's amazing to get to know you. Really inspiring. I admire your energy, what you're doing and building. So thanks very much for this. And yeah, we're in touch, man. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. See you later. Bye now.
See you guys. Bye. All right.